What does your crazy neighbor do to be labeled the crazy neighbor? Had severe anger issues and yelled at anything or anyone he didn't like on the street. A few years ago, he had a road rage incident, and when he started banging on the other car's windows, the occupants got out and beat him badly. During this, he had a heart attack and now barely has enough mobility to walk to the mailbox and back. Also, he doesn't yell anymore. Story 2. He eats my flowers. In his defense, he told us that he'd been doing it for years when he introduced himself after we bought the house. He also brought over frozen cookies in a plastic bag as a housewarming gift, but wasn't sure what was in them. We share a side yard and he's a really great neighbor. Just an older, quiet guy who keeps to himself and eats my flowers. Comes over to my yard, eats the lilies raw or brings scissors and clips the heads to boil and make jam. I thought that his particular foraging was interesting and quirky, so I planted a couple raspberry, blackberry, and blueberry bushes 3 years ago when we first moved in on the side yard we share. I told him to help himself to berries anytime, especially before the birds do. The bushes have all gone insane and the entire side of my house is now a summer berry haven for us to share. Having a decent relationship with the guy I share a property line with is worth some dead-headed flowers. Well, nice of the guy to give you a heads up at least. And nice of you to indulge him, I guess? Why can't he make his own, though? Anyway, story 3. My neighbor was an 85-year-old widow that lived alone. She had 2 vehicles, a car and a truck. And over the course of a few months, I realized that she was no longer parking her car in the garage, and she had done so for the many years prior to that. Then suddenly the truck wasn't being parked inside the garage either. Turns out she no longer had room in her garage to park her vehicles because she was walking down to the residential construction site about a block away every evening, and in doing so she would grab 2 2x4s and bring them home. She had over 500 of these stacked in her garage, and when she was questioned on what she was going to do with it, she didn't have an answer. Edit. Bonus crazy neighbor stories. A. I drove 16 hours straight, pulled into my driveway, and crashed on my couch immediately. Must have left the garage door open because I woke up to the neighbor lady shaking me to see if they missed my newspaper delivery that morning also. B. Neighbor lady thought I didn't clean up after my dog in her front yard. I've never owned a dog. So she retaliated by walking around the neighborhood with a garbage bag, picking up every bit of dog crap she could find and dumped said bag of dog crap on my front lawn while I was standing in the front window watching. C. Ran up over $300 on 1 month's water bill of mine because neighbor lady was hooking her sprinkler up to my water when I would leave for work in the morning, and she would let it run all day right up until I got home from work. D. She would put up an ugly orange snow fence between our yards in the fall to keep my leaves out of her yard. Me pointing out that I only had pine trees did not dissuade her from the decision to leave the snow fence up. Story 4. We had one a while back that had a drug lab in the home. Crazy fights yelling at all hours of the night. Dude would wander around the hood tweaked out crazy. And once he threw a Molotov cocktail out the second floor window at another dude who was smashing up his car, screaming, "I'll friggin' kill you, mother effer." Those were interesting times. Story 5. This older lady lives across the street from me and she is obsessed with the leaves falling on her lawn, to the point that she will come out of her house and pick up one individual leaf off the grass in the fall or any other time. She spends hours a day outside with the leaf blower in fall. She will go and knock on other neighbors' doors if she thinks you have too many leaves on your grass. She'll come over into your yard and do it herself if you're not home. What I think is weird is that she's in her 70s, no kids or grandkids living with her, and lives alone in a pretty large 4-bedroom house. It has an amazing in-ground pool in the backyard with a slide and diving board and everything. Nobody has used that pool in at least 5 years, yet she opens it up every summer. Somehow she likes my family and has never once yelled at us about our leaves and randomly brings over things like half-eaten gallons of ice cream, and she asks if we want it because she's not using it. Well, then you gotta ask the question, what happened to the other half? Did she binge it all in one night and was like, I shouldn't do that again? Or what? Did she have people over? What is so strange. Where did the other half go? I need to know. Story 6. Used to live in a little town of 300 people, where we had an elderly neighbor named Gladys. She would routinely look near our garbage can outside and take the recyclable bottles and cans we would leave for her. After we cleaned out a fish tank, we put the gravel and fake plants in a bag and left it on top of the garbage because it was already full. About a week later, Gladys hollered at me while I was outside to come over, as she wanted to show me something. She had taken that bag we left and planted the fake plants along the side of her house. She said she wasn't really confident that they would make it, but so far they seemed to be thriving. I could only nod and compliment her on her green thumb. Aside from the taking it from my neighbors, I have been fooled by fake plants before, so I sympathize with Gladys there. Story 7. I used to live in an HOA. One of the members on the board lived across the street from my neighbor and I. He sent a letter to us saying that we all have to mow the lawn on the same day at the same cut height and in the same pattern to create uniformity in the neighborhood. My neighbor and I intentionally cut it on different days and in opposite patterns just to annoy the guy. Okay, so this is gonna sound tangential, but I swear it comes back. Video games are like dopamine machines, right? They are made to make brain happy because you do things, typically complete tasks, make brain happy chemicals happen. Is that the same thing with stuff like this for older people, where having uniformity in their lawns makes them feel like task accomplished, making happy chemicals in brain? That is the only thing I can think of, unless they're super convinced that property values will really go up because of this. Story 8. Well, I used to have a neighbor who was legitimately mentally ill, although I don't know his actual diagnosis. His truck wouldn't start one day, dead battery, and he told everyone on the street that another neighbor was stealing the electricity. He knew this because of the way this guy parked his vehicle. Obviously, it was sucking electricity from the ground for his battery, which drained the car batteries near him. Many times he would run down the street and warn everyone to hide their valuables because Japan was invading the country. He wasn't on drugs, but he did take medication for his mental illness, and everyone on our street could tell when he stopped taking it. Whenever he would start saying completely irrational things, we would remind him to take his medication. He would thank us and go home, presumably to take it. He lived alone and was getting older, so I think he had a hard time remembering to take it. There were many, many more incidents. Story 9. She stalks us. Like every time I get home, she'll walk outside and tell me I was either 3 minutes later getting home this time or that I'm home 2 minutes earlier and then ask me why. One time, my friend and her sister came to pick me up. My neighbor was against her window with her hands and face pressed up on the glass trying to look at who was coming to pick me up. My friend and her sister were so terrified they called me to tell me to hurry up because a crazy lady was staring at them through a window. I replied, "Oh, it's just a stalker neighbor." Yeah, that was a fun day. Story 10. I cared for an elderly woman for many years. She lived to the age of 93 in a crime-ridden inner-city neighborhood by being tough and nasty as any criminal living nearby. Her oddest actions involved her incorrect belief that she owned the road in front of her house. She didn't even own a car, but she insisted that nobody park there. She would confront them if they parked in front of her house. If they did it again, she slashed their tires in the middle of the night, over and over for years. She was never caught, but everybody knew it was her. She only stopped when she lost the physical strength to slash a tire in her mid-80s. She then started using spray paint on the cars. "You don't park in front of my house no more," was all the justification she needed to damage her neighbor's cars. Hey, she was right. Not about owning the street in front of her house, but she was right that they don't park there anymore. Story 11. My friends used to live in a gentrifying neighborhood near the beach in my city. They had a regular apartment, but someone bought the building in front of them, beach adjacent. They knocked it down and put up a few luxury homes. This crazy woman bought one. She had a 2-car garage and a driveway, and best we could tell, she had one car. But no one was allowed to park on the street in front of her house, which was clearly marked as a public street and where people had been parking since forever to go to the beach or because their building didn't have parking. We could see this street from their apartment. She went out and keyed any cars parked there. It took a while to figure out it was her, but eventually people saw her doing it. All the neighbors warned their friends not to park there, and people started putting up cameras to get evidence of it. Some dude with a piece of crap, ugly truck started parking directly in front of her house every day just to screw with her, because he did not care if she scratched it up. So she slashed his tires. It got to the point where every time she opened her door to walk outside, neighbors would cuss her out through their windows. One night she went out in the middle of the night and painted the entire curb on that street red. Someone got it on video, several neighbors called the city, and I think she got a talking to and a fine. And she had several insurance claims pending against her from damages to cars. She finally stopped. Everyone still hates her though, even new neighbors, as they're told the story of her from older residents. Story 12. The neighbor behind us had a leak in his water pipe, and rather than fix it, he just had the sump pipe drain it out into the backyard. This meant that all year round, the back of our yard was a little bit damp. Eventually, the leaky pipe burst and filled the house with 5 feet of water. His solution to this was just to keep the pump running and flood the entire neighborhood. After about an hour, a posse of all the neighbors whose yards were being flooded confronted him and called the city to shut off the water. The city fixed the water pipe and the neighbor ended up with a large fine. At least my yard stays basically dry now. I should also mention that this neighbor once rented the house out to a bunch of crackheads, and it nearly burned down because the ex-girlfriend of one of these morons snuck in and set the house on fire. Story 13. Not sure if this counts as crazy, but I have this neighbor who's part of a spiritual organization called Brahma Kumaris. Every time someone in the neighborhood is going through some rough times, especially deaths in the family, she goes to their house and instead of offering condolences, she preaches how they should join this organization. Things will be better. She doesn't acknowledge anyone the rest of the time, except for this time when someone dies or a new family member moves into the neighborhood to whom she preaches and gives books written by leaders of the organization. OP, let's not mince words here. It's a cult. Call it a cult. That's okay. Story 14. Oh, Janet, may she rest in peace. We rented a house from my mom's coworker. Our landlord grew up in this house and was renting it out. Across the street was Janet, an 80-ish-year-old lady who had lived in that house most of her life and knew our landlord very well. Well, because she knew the landlord, that meant she felt she could come into our house whenever she wanted. She watched us through her window and had every excuse to come by. I have never really locked my doors, but obviously we started to. It didn't stop her. If she knew we were home, she would ring the doorbell incessantly. Our blinds always had to be down, living room lights off, so she wouldn't know we were home. Just got in? Quick, run inside before Janet sees you. We saw her peering out of her blinds on a regular basis. One morning, the doorbell was going. I hid in the bathroom to pretend like I wasn't home. How did she see me? The doorbell stopped, but the doorknob kept rattling. She tried for 5 full frickin' minutes to open our door. Probably would have been longer, but I gave up and let her in. Why didn't I tell her to screw off? Look, I'm a nice Midwestern girl. I can be confrontational if someone is being mean, but she was just, I don't know, lonely, a tad crazy, but harmless. Some notable things that she did/said. A. My husband was cooking when she came in and called him a good little housewife. B. Told our neighbor he shouldn't be dating his daughter. They were, of course, not father and daughter, and were in fact a 40-year-old couple. There wasn't actually a big age difference either. C. My favorite was when she was in our living room. She very suddenly crouched down and peered out of our blinds. She said, "Look at those fat people walking that skinny dog." D. After we started locking the door, our doorknob rattling like she was trying to break in, and the doorbell was a constant thing. My husband tells that story so well, it's like she was a character from a sitcom. We didn't know these people existed. She was eventually put into a home and passed away about a year or so later. Look, good on OP for having the heart to let Janet in. However, can't say I would do the same. She sounds incessant. Like, I get it, not harmful, just lonely, a bit out of it, but still, I got my own life to live, lady. Sorry. Story 15. Former crazy neighbor here. I, 23 at the time, F, lived alone in a basement unit in a not great part of town. My bedroom windows, being in the basement, lined up directly with a very busy street filled with bars and lots of traffic. While smoking cigarettes on my stoop, I often had a knife or baseball bat physically with me. To my neighbors, I often referred to a live-in boyfriend, even though I lived alone. At times, I would go as far as to yell at my fake boyfriend in my apartment when I heard people in the hallway, and then storm out of it and tell my neighbors what a jerk my boyfriend was. Also, my neighbors believed I didn't live alone. As a young woman living in a sketchy part of town, can't say I blame you, OP. Heck, it might have been even for the best. You don't know if it actually saved you or not. Story 16. I had a neighbor who would sneak into my yard at night and roll up my sod. It would be laid perfectly the night before, but I'd get up in the morning and it would be rolled up just like when it came from the store. I finally got upset and spent the night laying by my back door with a baseball bat and a flashlight, ready to bonk the crap out of whoever it was. Sure enough, they came around at 2 in the morning. I stood up, turned the light on, and was face to face with 4 raccoons, rolling up my sod, looking for bugs. I knew from the start this was raccoons. Not really a neighbor, but they're definitely annoying. Story 17. This guy is weird as hell. Okay, so he plays VR in a large bunny onesie, like the kind the kid gets in A Christmas Story, which, you know, cool, you do you. But he plays with his window open so everyone can see him. And on top of that, he plays, from what I can tell, exclusively military sims and never breaks character. You can hear him yelling stuff like, "Contact 30 clicks south by southwest," or stuff like, "Down reloading, ready up." The guy will throw himself to the ground, and I mean throw himself. The few times I've spoken to him or seen him in person, he's had bruises on his arms and face from hitting the ground. And that's only what I can see from the window. Other than that, at night you can hear the guy grinding, hammering, and drilling on something. I don't know, he's a weird dude. He says he works for the government, does contractor work. He has really nice expensive stuff and new vehicles all the time. He can't carry on a conversation. starts getting nervous and will break away as soon as he can. He was home for a few days, said he was in between contracts. I managed to talk to him while he was setting stuff outside. The stuff he was laying out, a rucksack that had seen some heavy use, and everything from medical and survivalist camping gear to empty magazine holders and a plate holder for bullet-resistant plates. He said he was letting them air out since he was planning on going backpacking for a few weeks. Weirdest part is he leaves almost every night between 9 to 10 p.m. Probably to get some of the junk food he leaves in his car occasionally, but every night? I like to think the guy's a secret agent and uses VR as an excuse to explain away bruises and cuts. Either way, I feel sorta safe. He's genuinely nice when he does talk to you. He just has that I haven't spoken to another human being for years kinda thing. You go, Secret Agent Bunny. Saving the world one hop at a time. I wouldn't say this is a crazy neighbor. A weird one, sure. A weird neighbor. He has some weird interests in what he does, and he's just really committed. Not crazy, though. This man's not hurting anyone. Story 18. I used to rent the basement apartment of the neighborhood crazy lady. Her car was decorated with thousands of rocks that she glued all over it. The property was incredibly overgrown. She had 5 unlicensed dogs, 2 cats, turtles that lived in her bathtub, pigeons, chickens, a rooster, and more animals that I can't specifically remember. But I do remember counting them all up at some point, and there ended up being 17. She would regularly practice saxophone while the dogs howled along with her. She didn't have a job and spent every day going on Craigslist free and picking things up. There was a room in the basement where she kept all of the stuff that was 3 to 4 feet deep and completely packed. I remember a cardboard cutout of Captain Kirk, and one of the Statue of Liberty sticking out of the hoard. I desperately took a job as a door-to-door solicitor for a short time and was randomly assigned to my neighborhood. When I introduced myself to the next-door neighbor and said what house I lived in, they were about ready to wring my neck. I told them, yeah, it probably sucks living next to her, but I actually live there, so yeah, no sympathy. She just sounds like a hoarder. And it sucks when hoarders live alone because it just gets them deeper into their own stuff and deeper into their own stuff, literally. Probably not the greatest time up there. Story 19. Ours is the classic retired old man, terrible health and literally nothing going on in his life. He's not married and I try to stay out of everyone's business, but I don't believe he has any kids. Rarely has any visitors. I think he had a dream once of being a police officer but never quite made it. So he's taken it upon himself to be the neighborhood police person. He spies on everyone and makes it his business to know everything. My favorite encounter was catching him literally camping out in my front yard bushes early morning, spying on a neighbor a few doors down. He had a coffee mug, notepad, blanket, literally just hanging out in my front yard, making notes about the weird folk who were likely doing drugs at home. When I asked him what he was doing, he didn't seem to understand that it was inappropriate. He seems to like us, so it's nice, I guess, but he creeps me out. Story 20. Not crazy, but A. She takes 2 hours to mow her lawn, which includes getting down on her hands and knees next to said mower while it's running to meticulously pull any weed she finds or address whatever issue. B. She will call my husband at 10 p.m. to let him know she's not home, but that so-and-so will be stopping by her house to leave their car or do whatever. But don't worry, this is an authorized act. C. She let us know that she will be out of town for a period of time. Can we keep an eye on her house? Yeah, sure, no problem. She also says the police have been informed of her departure. D. She called the police on a fox in her yard because it was acting weird. The police came and checked it out and says it was okay. I had seen the same fox the day before and it was a juvenile. I think she just startled it, hence the weirdness. Those are the ones that come to mind. Getting down on your hands and knees next to a mower while it's running is, in my opinion, the craziest out of all of this. The rest is like, oh, that's kind of strange, and the last one is even a bit sensible because rabies outbreaks are no joke. But the first one? That's concerning. Woman has no fear. What kind of crazy neighbor stories do you all have? I'm sure you have some. As for me, I'm pretty sure I am the crazy neighbor to a lot of people because people rarely ever see me, and when they do, I don't talk much to them. But they probably do hear me yelling in my booth for voice acting stuff, so that's fun. Sorry, neighbors. Anyway, thank you so much for watching. I hope you have a wonderful day or night wherever you are, and I'll see you in the next one.